Well, for more on the midterm elections, I'm joined in the studio by Associate Professor in American Politics at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney, Brendon O'Connor. Brendon O'Connor, welcome to the program. 2 years ago, the Democrats were celebrating a new president and they had large majorities in both houses. What's happened?
Well, it's a remarkable turnaround, isn't it? I mean, there was a great deal of optimism. There's a sense that there was a repudiation of George W. Bush's Republican Party in 2008. Obama comes in with majorities, as you say, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And I suppose to be where we are 2 years later is something not a lot of people were predicting. Maybe a sense that Obama's capacities, the Democrats' capacities, are probably overrated. There's been a natural bounce back by the Republican Party. But I think it shocked a lot of people quite rightly how big this bounce back looks like it's going to be.
But were expectations too high?
Yes, of course. I think there was a sense that Obama could do a lot more than someone who was fairly inexperienced as he was would achieve. The Congress is notorious for being a fairly ossified body where things slow down. This tactic of the filibuster has been used by the Republicans a lot to slow down legislation or to stop legislation. So he certainly hasn't achieved some of the things he promised. On unemployment, he was hoping his administration would be able to get the unemployment rate down below 8%. It hasn't been able to do this. So a combination of things, a bad economy and high expectations, I think have really hurt him.
But he also has some achievements. I mean, healthcare reform, for example, he's pulled the troops out of Iraq. Some would say he stopped a recession that could have been even worse if he hadn't put in place economic reforms. To what extent is it a failure of policy or a failure to communicate what they have done?
Well, that's the huge question in Washington, D.C. I mean, if the economy improves in the next 2 years and his popularity doesn't go up very much, we'll know it's the communication side. If the economy improves and his popularity goes up, we might say, well, maybe it was a combination of things, but it was the economy principally. On healthcare, I think it's interesting. I mean, 30 million people are probably covered by the new legislation who weren't previously covered, who didn't have healthcare. But a lot of those people aren't voting probably in this election. They're probably at the poorer end of society, the working poor or young people. And I think those people, some of them who came out in 2008, are actually likely to stay home this time. Traditionally, they don't vote at midterm elections. A lot of young Americans, a lot of poorer, sort of working poor Americans. So I think Obama's party, the Democrats, will be really hurt by turnout where the Republicans have the enthusiasm on their side and probably have tended to do a little bit better in midterm elections in recent years.
Is that perhaps, I guess, one thing that is or tends to get forgotten is how extraordinary 2 years ago was in terms of the turnout, in terms of the mood?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it was historic high levels of voting in the United States. Just over 60% of Americans who are eligible to vote turned out, which is quite remarkable. In this election, it might be more than normal, so it might be about 40%. Some midterm elections, which are pretty significant, like in '94, got about 35% of eligible voters turning out. So the turnout is a real problem for the Democrats, and I think with the enthusiasm being on the Republican side, this will really help them, and I think this is why it's very likely the Republicans will win the House of Representatives on Tuesday.
I was going to say, what are you predicting? Are you predicting that they'll lose the majority in the House, but they'll hold the Senate?
Yes, I'd say so. I'd say the Republicans are likely to have 48 or 49 senators out of a Senate of 100 senators, so the Democrats just hold on by a very slim margin. In the House of Representatives, I suppose whether the sort of the wave is going to be a kind of a tsunami, which is anything sort of plus 60 seats for the Republicans is just dreadful for the Democrats. If the Democrats can keep it under 50, I'm sure they'll try to message it and say, well, it could have been worse, or it's, this was in our range of expectations. But anything, particularly over, Bill Clinton lost 52, his party lost 52 seats in 1994.
And he bounced back in 1996 in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, it was dramatic, and he used the Congress to play against, which I think Obama will have the opportunity to do if the Republicans control the House. But it was seen as a very dramatic setback at the time.
How significant is the Tea Party going to be?
Well, the Tea Party probably adds to the Republican enthusiasm at one level. It'll get people out to vote. It's been a great marketing strategy to be attached to the Republican Party. This name of the Tea Party itself is something that's galvanised people around a sort of anti-government message and other things. But tactically, it will be a disadvantage to them probably in Delaware with this woman, Christine O'Donnell, who's got a lot of attention on not just news shows but comedy shows, is likely to lose in Delaware. The Republicans might have had a chance with maybe a more moderate candidate. and they have another candidate, Rand Paul in Kentucky, who is likely to win, but I think a slightly more moderate candidate in Kentucky would have won by bigger margins.
He's got some radical ideas, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is considered one of the great achievements of America in terms of moving beyond its kind of segregationist, racist past. To have questioned that piece of legislation is a pretty radical idea.
So if you're right, if they lose the majority in the House but they maintain it in the Senate, even if that is by a slim margin, what will that mean for Barack Obama in 2012?
Gridlock. This will mean that nothing gets done, that there will just be this continuous standoff between the Congress and the administration, the presidency, that very little will be achieved. If you care about the global environment, if you want America to pass policies on global warming, what they call cap and trade policies, this won't be achieved. There'll be a real setback in that area. So I think the sense of Obama achieving quite a number of things on sort of finance reform, on healthcare reform, we've probably seen the best of it for this 4-year period, at least, of his first part of his presidency. Very little of significant legislation, I think, will be achieved in the next 2 years.
Interesting times. Brendon O'Connor, many thanks for joining us.
Not a problem.